morning. Good morning, all. No, I'm not going to do Viper impersonations. I would like to talk to you about a couple things here. The first one is would be the Red Badge Project, which is a nonprofit storytelling program for vets who are returning, who have post-traumatic stress. I also want to talk about the power of storytelling, which I believe begins very early on in our life. It begins with projects we experience, people we know, details here, little bits and pieces which of themselves are not stories necessarily, but they add to and flavor the stories we do tell. These bits and pieces are what put great storytelling together. So, I started a school 12 years ago to teach how to tell storytelling. Now, it is within walking distance of this place. We wanted to teach young filmmakers how to tell a story in film. I felt then that what we experienced over a period of years really was a self-realization program, a self-experience, and a self-expression most specifically. The alumni said that this program had changed their life-changing. That became the basis of the Red Badge Project because it relates to why I feel so strongly about storytelling. Years ago, in 2012, I was in Crested Butte, Colorado. It was winter, and I was invited to join a group of soldiers who had recently returned from combat. All of them were physically and emotionally damaged. All of them had post-traumatic stress. They had difficulty looking up, engaging at all. But when the topic of skiing downhill came up, their heads lifted, and they paid attention as though it was a whole new world they were hearing about. The Adaptive Sports Center there in Crested Butte had made equipment for them, for each one specifically to go downhill and do some downhill skiing and feel all the excitement that their physical and post-traumatic stress would allow them. I wasn't able to be there the next day when they had come downhill, and I was hoping to be there watching each one of the faces of their heads lifted with some wonderful look in their face. And one of the ski instructors did tell me that they all had a look of excited wonderment. Excited wonderment. And I thought, well, that translates out to the rush, the positive rush of feeling alive. After that experience in Crested Butte, I began to watch the numbers of post-traumatic stress returning from combat, and the suicide rate exceeded the number killed in combat. So there were 22 a day. Still are to this day, approximately 22 a day killing themselves. I thought this life-changing experience that I talked about in the film school might be a means for them to come back, to find how they can best express themselves. When I left that, I really could not get these faces. They haunted me, these faces that were hiding in that evening. I should, first of all, point out that the post-traumatic stress itself, the history on it goes back quite a ways, probably to any war, but we know it most from letters that were written during the Civil War by soldiers, and it was called cowardice then. In World War I and II, it was called, respectively, the shell shock and battle fatigue. Post-traumatic stress itself was so labeled due to the combat trauma and the 24/7 intensity of everything being on the edge and a feeling of inability to do much about that. A person closes down emotionally. So it struck me then that we had to bring this life-changing experience from the film school down to Joint Base Lewis McChord to teach them how to best express themselves through storytelling. The first thing we did with them, interestingly, was to get them to laugh. First day we passed out joke books. And we tell them to stand up and tell a joke. Well, they look through the book. They don't want to stand up and tell a joke. They're not in the mood for that. But because of their voluntary, they do stand up. They do deliver the best they possibly can. And the laughter begins to follow. The book is passed around from one person to another. They begin to tell the jokes much better. And then they laugh freer. The joke telling is better. And then we ask them to act out Yo Mama jokes, circling one another, pointing angrily at each other and saying, well, your mama is so old, she was a waitress at the Last Supper. Back and forth, and they get pretty silly. And they then are opened up to write about their stories. Their stories. I think back on my own life when I was a kid. My older brother had to sit with me occasionally when my folks would go out. And he loved music, and he would put on records that he wanted to hear, and I had to listen to them. And this wonderful education I had about music. He would put on Billie Holiday, and that would go to Puccini. He would then play Charlie Parker, Miles Davis, and that would go to Mozart. Mozart. Oh, my God. That puts me in mind of the time that I was sitting in an auditorium like this, rehearsal hall for the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. And they were going to have a concert that night with a guest conductor, Arturo Toscanini, who was at that time well into his 80s. And it was going to be my favorite composer. And he came out on stage, and he looked at the kids out in the audience, all of us out there. We'd been driven there in a school bus, dropped off. And he nodded to us, and then he acknowledged the musicians with a little respectful bow. And his hands rose. And he became a 30-year-old man physically. His hands rose like they were being pulled by invisible hands, or a helium bag or hot air bag was going to pull him up any moment. And then this 30-year-old man brought his arms down and came up with this extraordinary sound of this music. And it was a sound these young ears had never heard before. So when we get to these soldiers becoming free, they become free because they are feeling This is not an intellectual process. Laughter and music seem to key into something in them that they really have to feel, have to express the best way they possibly can. So what we have here is a group of maybe 100 so far that have gone through this course, all of them saying that it's been life-changing. One of the feedbacks we get from them is that it frees them up. They're free to say whatever they want to say. And they do. They begin to write things. They begin to write positive things. We don't encourage the negative. We just always encourage the positive, so that it begins to roll out. They talk about a favorite aunt that had a piano that was always out of tune, a favorite dog, whatever it is. Once they tap into the positive stuff, it just begins to roll out. And it gets to be a situation that's very moving, because the things they say are, "You've saved my life." Recently I had a soldier after the session and came up to me and he said, very unsure of what he was feeling, is this what joy feels like? And I looked at him for a moment. I thought he was kidding, and he realized that this guy probably had PTSD before he came into the service, and he wasn't quite sure of the good feeling that he was having. And I said, it's okay to laugh now. And we did, and he had, he couldn't stop laughing himself because he felt embarrassed for the innocence of the question. And I felt joy that he would ask that question. And another soldier who was a National Guardsman who was activated, went to combat, came back, could not use his hands effectively, he couldn't write, he couldn't hold a pencil, he couldn't do a keyboard. He kept coming, and the doctors, by the way, told him that condition was permanent. He kept coming back to the class, which we encouraged him to do. And he gained the use of his fingers, his hands. He went back to his original job as a middle school teacher. But he said before he left, he said to Sean Wong, one of our teachers, he said, "I don't know how to tell you this, but you've saved my life." The progress is something that comes along to us in very surprising ways. And it is a program that's now broadening out for women in Federal Way, VA Center, and in Walla Walla with Vietnam vets. I'm just very proud to be here in the first place, to be able to share this information with you about these great programs. Thank you very much for being here.